Mayflower it's a difficult and complicated history. Mayflower and the Speedwell ships were taking a group of passengers from Southampton to the Americas in 1620. 102 went, and they were all crammed onto the Mayflower.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our Shaolin Talks. Thank you so much for joining us again. We have Janine with us.
Hello.
And we have a very special guest with us. Joining us is Katerina Loriggio.
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining us. So, as you know, our monthly topic is all about culture. We feel that it's really important. Culture is very important for us in many different ways, socially, economically. It reminds us of our history, of where we've come from, and also it shapes us who we are today and who we are to become in the future. And today our guest is gonna kindly tell us all about an amazing project that's coming up in Southampton City called the Mayflower 400. So the Mayflower 400, what's it all about?
So this year is the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower and the Speedwell ships leaving Southampton.
Right,
so
okay.
The Mayflower it's a difficult and complicated history, if I'm honest. I suspect the 400th will be the last anniversary. I don't know that there'll be a Mayflower 500. I think it's probably one of those anniversaries that has lasted. Yeah, I think it's probably reached its limit. So essentially, the Mayflower and the Speedwell ships were taking a group of passengers from Southampton to the Americas in 1620 in search of a new life. And the Speedwell had come from Leiden in the Netherlands, and on the Speedwell were a group of Puritan separatists. So this is very complicated theological history.
Wow. Okay.
So essentially, Henry VIII had reformed the church.
Yes, I was reading
made it
about
Protestant. And a group of Protestants, a very strict group of Puritan Protestants called Brownists at the time, they took the kind of Protestant movement one step further. Okay. And they believed that the Bible said to them that you know, wherever you worship is a church. You don't need a church. Okay. Which therefore meant you didn't need the Church of England, which is not only irreligious at the time, but it was treasonous because, of course, the head of the Church of England was the king or queen.
Yeah.
So actually they were political as well as religious exiles. Right. And they weren't even really technically exiles. They escaped. They fled. At that time you had to have permission to leave the country, the king's permission, and they didn't even have that permission. So they had fled because they felt their lives were at risk. Many of them were from the Midlands, from many of our partners across the UK, so small towns and villages like Bassett Law and Scrooby, a big cluster of Midland towns. And they'd gone to the Netherlands and they'd lived there for 12 years. And they were becoming disgruntled with the Netherlands. They didn't speak Dutch. They consequently were in quite menial jobs. It was a very urban environment when they were used to quite a rural setting. So they were quite keen to leave the Netherlands. And also their children were becoming quite liberal. The Netherlands was even then quite a liberal.
And obviously we're talking, how far back are we talking
1620, so 400.
So 400. 400 years. For those of you who don't know, so it's called Mayflower 400. So this marks 400 years of this event happening,
So even then they found the Netherlands too liberal.
Right,
for them. So they decided they would set up a new colony in the New World, which was America. So they had sailed on the Speedwell to Southampton, where they were met by a ship called the Mayflower, which had come from London. And the passenger on the Mayflower were actually just economic migrants. And both ships were sponsored by the City of London to go and set up a colony as part of Virginia. And the ship set off on August the 15th from Southampton, but the Speedwell had sprung a leak. And it had actually already sprung a leak before it had arrived in Southampton. So the two ships were actually docked in Southampton for 2 weeks, which was extraordinary because their lives were at risk. And actually there is, one of the philosophies is they chose Southampton because it was a tolerant city. They actually,
that's nice.
They actually felt, they felt it was a city that would not dob them in with the with the powers that be, because there was a lot of Huguenots here. There were lots of different religious groups already in Southampton and living here, plus a lot of traders from different countries. It was already, a global gateway. Even 400 years ago. So they felt it was a city they'd be safe. Also, the city had all the expertise it needed, and it had the market it needed. So they wouldn't just have to buy food for their journey, they'd have to buy everything they needed to set up a new colony at the other end. So they'd have to buy the furniture, the tables, everything they needed for their new life, they had to purchase. And Southampton had all those goods. So Southampton was a good choice. But they actually just planned to come here, stock up and go. But because the Speedwell had taken in water, they had to have the Speedwell repaired while they were in Southampton.
Oh, right. Okay.
So they were actually stuck here for 2 weeks. And then as the Speedwell went again, it started taking in water again. So they stopped at Dartmouth.
Okay.
And they had the Speedwell fixed in Dartmouth. And then they took off again. And another 2 weeks, they decided the Speedwell wasn't going to make it. So they turned back and they went to Plymouth. And a very large number of the passengers just stayed behind with the Speedwell, and the Mayflower left.
How many passengers?
So finally 102 went, and they were all crammed onto the Mayflower.
So 102 passengers got on this boat.
Yep. And sailed the worst time of the year you could imagine.
Is it like, was it winter or something?
No, it was August, but of course, of course, by the time they arrive in the New World in November, it's terrible weather and there's storms, and actually they miss Virginia. They sail off course and they don't land in Virginia. So whilst they're docked outside of Massachusetts, as we know it now, they sign a new compact because they do have an agreement with the City of London about how they should live in Virginia.
Right.
But that agreement doesn't hold for Massachusetts.
Right, okay.
So they sign in and this is kind of one of the important things that happens. They sign a compact between themselves on the ship as to how they're all going to live and live together, because they're a very different group of people. I mean,
they from all walks of life.
Well, the Puritans called themselves the Pilgrims,
or
the Saints, and they called the others the Strangers. So it was the Saints and the Strangers, and it was a really, the strangers, the economic migrants, would not have liked the Pilgrims. I mean, they were a very strict religious sect.
Right, okay.
And they'd probably got a group of drunken marauders. We don't know anything about who the other people were, but odds on they did like a drink and they did like a dance and all the rest of it, which this group didn't like at all, Wow. So they had to come to some agreement of how they would all live together and live as a harmonious community. So the compact that's signed on that ship is considered a significant piece of paper in American history.
Okay.
And they go on land and they form a new colony, Plymouth Colony, which was actually a decimated Native American village. The village was originally called Patuxet.
Right, okay.
And it had...
And what was it decimated from?
Well, the history of Patuxet and the Wampanoag people, who are the native people to that area, obviously goes back. There's archaeological evidence to suggest that they've lived there for 12,000 years.
Wow.
So this is the big problem with the Mayflower story, and going back to what I said in the beginning about how we might stop telling it. In times gone by, people would say the Mayflower was the beginning of America. It was the first successful village. Well, this just isn't true, because the Native Americans had very successful
they have a different point
villages for thousands and thousands of years before the Mayflower arrives. And actually, it isn't even true. It's a myth which suited American politics in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, because here was a group of very well-living religious people. Actually, the first people who went to America were gold diggers and traders and slavers. No country really wants to base their mythological past on that kind of colonisation. But that's the truth of the matter. The first colonists were not necessarily all good people. And so the Wampanoag people were used to interacting with Europeans. They knew Captain Smith, as in Captain Smith and Pocahontas. They knew Captain Smith, and some of what we know about the Wampanoag people is because Captain Smith wrote it down. So we know about their history from Captain Smith. So Captain Smith had been there in 1615 and he traded with the Wampanoag people.
Okay.
And he'd left a colleague of his in another ship behind. Captain Hunt, I think he was called. I'm not too sure about that. I think it was Thomas Hunt. Can't quite remember.
Okay.
But he is not such a nice man, and Thomas Hunt actually steals 20 Native American men from the village of Patuxet and 7 from a neighbouring village. So he enslaves 27 Native Americans and takes them to Malaga, where he sells them as slaves. And this is quite a very important part of the Mayflower story, which is never normally told, and what we're really trying to address in Southampton.
Okay.
So one of these guys who is taken to Malaga and sold as a slave is actually freed by a group of monks. There was a group of monks in Malaga who protested to the slavery, and a number of the Native Americans are released. And one of these guys is released is a guy called Tisquantum, or Squanto, and he somehow ends up in London. So in 1616, Squanto is living in London with a wealthy merchant, English merchant. And he makes it back to Patuxet in 1619 and finds to his great horror that he's expecting this great reunification with his family, but actually the village,
they're not there anymore.
the village has been completely decimated through a plague. There was a huge plague, 1616 to 1619, which may have been smallpox, but clearly is a European disease that has been taken to the Native Americans by a European or English ship. Nobody knows which disease, but of course the Native Americans had no immunity, they had no medicine.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, it's talk about modern parallels.
Yeah, exactly.
So this village is completely decimated. It was actually, in fact, a graveyard. I mean, the first thing the Mayflower passengers have to do when they settle there is bury the dead. There are bones. But this is where Squanto comes into his own, you see, because the Wampanoag people are now being threatened by neighbouring tribes. They think they've lost 60 to 90% of their people, and neighbouring tribes are trying to steal their land.
And sorry, at this point, has the Mayflower arrived?
So the Mayflower's arrived. The Mayflower's
has
arrived.
arrived in this situation.
Squanto's arrived 1619.
Right, okay.
The Mayflower's arrived 1620.
Oh, this is like a year later. Oh, wow,
Yeah, and the Wampanoag people are under threat. They're being threatened by other Native American tribes, and so they come to an agreement with the Mayflower settlers. So the Europeans, the English, will protect them against this other tribe because they come fully armed. The Mayflower ship, while it's a peaceful ship, it's fully armed.
Well, you never know what's happening, isn't it?
Yeah, so they had guns and they had bullets.
Or maybe they tried to trade with us as well.
Well, maybe. But they're fully armed, so they do a deal. And in return, Squanto stays with the settlers. Because, of course, Squanto can speak English because he has spent 3 years in London in some kind of enslaved role. We're not quite sure what his role was in London. We think he was paraded as a piece of exoticism.
Curiosity, some kind of...
Because he was tall and dark and, he obviously would have stood out compared to the London society. So he probably helped with, Wampanoag customs, language, geography. So he was a useful person to have for the traders because he knew the land and he knew the people. So Squanto is left basically with the settlers, and it's because of Squanto, because he can talk to them, because he knows how to farm, because he knows when to fish, which makes them a successful colony. And they owe the City of London a debt because the City of London has paid for their journey, and they have to send goods back to pay their debt. And they start sending back beaver fur, which beaver fur was nearly extinct in Europe at this time. It's a huge commodity during this time.
Wow.
And when the beaver fur starts arriving,
it's like
people start arriving.
Exactly.
And suddenly loads more ships are sent, and it's the beginning really of the full-scale colonisation of the USA. It's the beginning of Boston. Boston really is the first big town that's set up. So basically the success of the Mayflower is influential in the founding of the USA as an English colony, and in terms of British Empire, it was the first country in the British Empire. So it's been an anniversary which has been celebrated in the past through a very kind of imperial Royal Britannia kind of way.
And how is it being celebrated now?
Well, for a start, we're not. Yeah, exactly. So for a start, we're not saying celebrated or commemorated. We're saying we're marking the anniversary. And what we're trying to do, particularly in Southampton, is use the anniversary as an opportunity to retell the story. To make sure the Wampanoag people are included, because they haven't been in the past. So we opened with it's an amazing exhibition, and I think I've got good news. I think it's going to be extended, the run through till November now.
Oh wow! Yeah.
So we have an exhibition in Sea City Museum.
Fantastic.
Which is all led by Wampanoag artists and craftspeople.
Oh, wow.
And it tells their story, it tells about their traditions and their crafts.
That's great.
And essentially they've made a new belt from wampum. So wampum is it's a shell, it's a quahog, it's a clam shell. And it's kind of purple and white, and they only survive where fresh water meets salt water. So it's spiritually very, very important for Native American people. And they take these clam shells and they chip away, and then they grind them on a stone to make a bead, and they make belts which tell their history.
Oh wow!
So they have a new belt which they've
amazing.
made. Yeah, it's taken 8 months,
Oh, wow.
and 100 of them. There's 5,000 handcrafted beads,
Oh,
and they've retold their story in a belt.
like priceless. Isn't it?
It is.
You can't
It's
put a price on it.
phenomenal.
And you can see that.
So that belt
see
is
that.
on display at Sea City at the moment.
Wow,
So
you guys have to go down and see that.
It's called Wampum Stories of the Shells of Native America.
Oh, wow.
So get down and see it. It's a beautiful exhibition, lots of videos. You can get to learn a lot about Native American culture, which is fantastic. We've commissioned a new education resource, and Paula Peters, who's a Wampanoag scholar who I work very closely with, she has co-written that resource with teachers at Oasis Academy in Mayfield.
Yeah, I know Oasis, yeah.
But it's amazing.
Okay,
This
great.
is that we believe, and I think we're sure because no one else in the Wampanoag tribe knows of another. We think this is the first education resource which has been co-written from an English and a Native American perspective.
Wow, so
That's
this is
a
the first
really
of a
good
kind.
Yeah.
cooperation, isn't
Yeah,
it?
no,
So
it's
get
great.
to both sides to the story.
So you see the point of view of the people leaving, but you also see the point of view of the people where the ship's arriving, and that's a really important thing. So hopefully, lots of schools that all launches next week. We're hoping schools across Southampton take that up because you know it's so much of Southampton is called Mayflower.
Yeah.
It is,
And
isn't
actually-
it? When I first heard about it, I was like,
You
is
thought
it
it
the
was
Mayflower?
theatre,
I thought it was
right?
the Mayflower
Yeah.
Theatre.
Yeah.
And
But there's
I
this
didn't
Mayflower
realise-
Gym, there's
Yeah.
Mayflower, there's university buildings, there's
Yeah,
college
that's right.
buildings, you know, Mayflower Park, the Mayflower Memorial. So much of
Yeah.
Southampton is Mayflower. But what we really want is so when people see the word Mayflower, they actually have a full sense
Yeah, there's a
of what that
history.
means and who it's impacted. And actually, just, you know, a big part of the education resource is asking young people to question how they're taught history and
That's
why
very
do they think the Wampanoag story hasn't been told. And the other really fascinating thing about the Wampanoag story, as we're all girls, is it was a matriarchal society. It was a society that was dominated and led by women. But of course, because all the history was recorded by men, that wasn't recorded. So it's, you know, there's two hidden histories here. It wasn't just the Wampanoag story that's been told. It's the women. You know, they don't have any of the women's names. They know the women would have been leading the villages, but they don't have any of their names recorded because the men only recorded the other men's names.
Wow.
So it's a double, you know, it's a double hidden history there. It's, you know, and it was a really, you know, it's a fascinating culture. I've really enjoyed working with Wampanoag people so much. It's been really enriching experience learning about their culture and their approach. And I mean, the other thing which I think is amazing is so for the Wampanoag people, the American Thanksgiving ceremony is a day of mourning. And they actually take the day to reflect on their ancestors and what's happened.
We've just done
We just did like a bit of autumn festivals throughout the world.
we did that last week.
Yeah.
Kind of feature, and is again, you have a lot of where this Thanksgiving is combined with commemorating the death and kind of connecting with your ancestry.
Yeah, no. So, but the Native, you know, they say they give thanks every day. It's a huge part of their culture.
that's
Is
cool.
giving
Yeah,
thanks,
so
you know, for the birds, for the fish, for the tree. You know,
it's
very
lovely to
connected
share.
to nature.
So will we be able to learn more about that?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
how do people get involved?
Well,
if they want to learn more about this.
Obviously, go to the exhibition.
Right,
See
okay.
that on our website, mayflower400southampton.co.uk. I just had to check that. Yeah, stuff.
And there's one called .org, isn't there? There's Mayflower 400.
Well, there's the national website and there's the Southampton website. So it's really important you go to the Southampton one. So Mayflower 400 Southampton.co.uk.
Remember that one, yeah.
And we've made lots of films because the Wampanoag people were going to come over
Yeah.
But obviously because of COVID, they couldn't.
Yes.
So they've been making us lots of films. There's a really beautiful film on there of their dance traditions and their dance culture, because the dancers were going to come and they can't.
Oh,
So-
that would have been such a cool
amazing.
event, isn't it?
Yeah,
that would
If
be
you can
lovely.
see dance and music.
Exactly, yeah. So they've made a film of that for us. We're making a film this week with their young people, some of which are bicultural, and they really want people to understand that being a Native American looks and feels like very many
That
different
would be really
things.
cool to learn. I would learn this.
So that film will be up on our website soon. We have commissioned. So one of the important parts of the history for Southampton was a letter was read here by the Pilgrims' pastor, John Robinson.
Okay.
So he was going to join them on the Mayflower. He was ill and he couldn't. So he writes them a letter before they leave, and that letter is read out in Southampton. And it's actually a very, very beautiful letter about living well with people and being tolerant and understanding and not taking offence and not giving offence, and how it's important to work for the greater good, and how it's important to elect a leader because of their good sense, not because they've got a fancy coat. Or talk a good talk.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very, it is actually a great letter. So we've made a film of that. We've got Father David from St Michael's reading that for us, because he could get his head around the 17th century language. But we also, the Mayor of Southampton, we have a contemporary letter from the Mayor of Southampton to the Pilgrims, where she makes pledges that from now on we will only teach the story of Mayflower and Southampton from a Native American as well as a European perspective.
That's fantastic.
She repledges to be a city of sanctuary. She pledges to work towards telling more community stories, because this is the problem with history and Britain, full stop. We only tell certain stories, and lots of stories aren't told. So the Mayor in her letter makes a commitment to tell more stories and more viewpoints and work towards a more inclusive city.
Nice.
But and we also commissioned the Native Americans to write a letter to the Pilgrims, and that's filmed and all that. And that's I urge, if you're only going to watch one thing on our website,
That's the one thing.
That's the one to watch. I bet it's very moving.
it is. It's
really
a
moving.
very generous and very heartbreaking letter that they've written to the Pilgrims. So that's all on there. And we're also encouraging people to write their own letters. So if you feel you would like to write a letter to the Pilgrims,
Yeah, you can do.
you can film it or you can write it to us,
why
and
not?
we'll put those online, because
So
it's
that's
really
how
important.
you can get involved as well.
Well, that's your opportunity to give your opinion about what happened 400 years ago, or an opinion about how we live together well now. I mean, that's a very important part of the Mayor's speech. Is actually
how you take everything. Maintain and bring it forward.
So that's a thing that's on our website. We're showing some films in November as part of City Eyes Film Festival, 2 Native American films, one of them about Squanto, one about a very recent injustice towards some Native American men who are wrongly arrested and imprisoned. So Paula will be doing some of that. We've got a very nice piece going up. We had a lovely Zoom call which we recorded with the Mayor and with Councillor Core and with Paula Peters. It's this fantastic, it's 3 women talking about politics. It's a great. So we've got that on our. So there's lots of opportunity digitally to engage through the Wampanoag people.
Yeah. And I saw on your website as well that actually you've got events that are happening that are kind of reflected in the US as well. They're doing like light festivals and lantern festivals. in Boston,
so we are.
and then-
We are trying. So
There's quite a connection there, isn't there? There's
a national. Well, it's an international compact, I guess. So there's 12 cities internationally have agreed, and they've used the word compact because of the Mayflower Compact. But it's a partnership. And it's led by Plymouth, who are charging the force as the kind of lead nationally. And it has a lot of the small cities and towns in the UK where Pilgrims came from. But it also has Leiden in the Netherlands, and it has Plymouth, Massachusetts, both from the Native American and the non-Native American viewpoint. So we say it's 4 nations rather than 3 nations, because obviously the Native Americans are their own nation. So it's a 4-nation compact, and everyone's doing projects, and the idea is that at certain times we all do the same project, and really where most likely to work best is in November, which is a light festival. So our light, we are working with schools across Southampton to do a poetry project.
I saw that. It's going to be great.
It's
so you
lovely.
can just get involved.
Yeah. They're really talented. The kids are really talented.
They can do like art and drama. They can do music. They can make poems.
Oh, that's a different project.
Oh, is that a different one?
That's a different project. There are so many things you can go about there. So the poetry project is to get young people to write poems, and we've got this light writer. It writes in laser. So it will write their poems on the walls, so you can hear and see their poems.
That sounds really creative.
And we're also working with the community at Western Shore. And what we're hoping to do, and it's a big ask, so fingers crossed, we're trying to use the sea-facing flats. There's 126 of them, and we're going to put messages in nautical flags in those sea facing, so we can put a message out to sea from the people who live at Western Shore. Because a really big part of our project is trying to get communities who don't have a chance to tell their story to tell that in creative ways. So Western Shore is a community which very often isn't included.
It's like overlooked,
So we're really keen, so we're trying to work with them to get their stories out, the messages, but literally they can only be 13 characters each, because there's 13 floors. And we're going to put them in nautical flag, and it should look stunning. They'll all be lit up, and we're calling it Towers of Light, so we're doing that. That will be our
and when's that
project.
going to be happening?
That's the last weekend in November, so it ties in with the American Thanksgiving. But we're trying to run, and I don't quite know what this looks like yet, so I can't talk to you about it in too much detail. If people have ideas. And we're also going to be running a project called Giving Thanks, which will run during November. And the idea originally was that was our moment where people could have suppers together, suppers with their neighbours, street parties. It was supposed to be a big, get lots of people together type event, to share food, to share culture, to share stories. Obviously,
that can't exactly.
We can't do that now. So we're looking at different ways now, but we're very, very interested in how different cultures and communities give thanks, because it's something we kind of all do. We all, either it's through prayer or through meditation, or the Christian tradition of Harvest Festival, or
that's what we were chatting about.
Vaisakhi or Boishakhi. There's so many festivals which are about giving thanks. So we're going to look at how we can reshape that. So we'll have that giving thanks, and we'll have the light art. So we'll be doing that. So so there are opportunities for it. It would look like a national programme, but Southampton has taken quite a different approach from the national compact, really, because we've tried to make our programme much more inclusive and much more about telling the hidden histories. Because one thing I think, when I was asked to come in and run the project, I did and ah about it, because the history isn't comfortable.
It is very,
but
it's difficult. It's tricky.
It's a difficult history,
it's
but
tricky.
The one thing I thought was really important about the Mayflower story, and what it did provide, was an opportunity to look at why people get on boats. And why people change their lives, and why people leave family and friends behind, and what that's all about, because that's still. That's still happening.
It's a huge step, isn't it? It's a huge step.
People don't do that lightly,
No.
Obviously, I mean, it's happening again now, but at the time when I was offered the job, it was when they first started having issues with refugees coming across in dinghies in the English Channel, and there was lots of negative press about it, as if people were on a jolly or something. People don't do that.
No one would do that. You kind of risk your life just on the whim.
So that for me, that's I thought was a really important opportunity that the anniversary did present, was looking at those stories of risk and change and robustness and perseverance and loss and friendship, and it's the big issues, but Southampton's got a hugely diverse community.
I think you're very brave to take on such a massive topic like this.
Well, you can only do so much, but the communities have been amazing. We've got a grant scheme. We've given 22 different communities small grants, so they can tell their own stories. We've commissioned artists. So the other project you were talking about with the music, the drama.
This is it.
So that's a project run by Artasia, and it's called Belonging. And it really encourages people to find a way that suits them, whether it's poetry, dance, music, craft, to talk about what belonging means to them and what living in Southampton means to them. And we are getting, bizarrely, we've had about 4 or 5 music clips have come from India.
Oh, wow.
So it's actually become an international project. So all those materials are online as well. And that's great. If you're locked down and you're bored, There's
Yeah.
loads of
Lots to
stuff to
watch.
do.
Yeah.
There's stuff to watch, but there's stuff to do, you know, so you can take part. And that's going to be everything that's made from that project, and people can drop it off at local libraries.
Oh, okay.
Will be put into a large-scale installation in West Quay Shopping Centre, also in November. So we're creating
okay.
a great big installation
yeah.
of belonging, which we hope
wow.
all the different communities of Southampton.
You're going to see all
fed
these
into. So-
beautiful stories
so
and
exactly.
experiences from different cultures, and
Yeah.
it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, so that project's called
lovely.
Belonging. So Art Asia are leading that. So
Okay.
yeah, so that's a project we've done. So we're not doing it all ourselves. We are asking other groups
people,
to
yeah.
do.
Different communities are coming together.
Yeah. But it's really important that people tell their own story. You know, it has to be authentic.
Yeah,
you know, people
definitely.
have to tell their own.
Yeah, and it's
stories.
also people don't want to feel left out,
Yeah.
isn't it? If you only have one side, other people might go like, oh, okay, well, we are involved in this too.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it must have affected quite a lot of people. I mean, that incident, that happening, that would have had a knock-on effect to millions and millions of people all around the world.
Well, there's millions of people who claim their ancestry back to Mayflower. I mean, those poor women must have been non-stop. I don't know how much. I mean, there's a lot of myth associated with it as well. I mean, really, I can't remember what the figure is. It's tens of millions of people can trace their ancestors back to Mayflower descendants. So, of course, there's that, but it was seen as politically advantageous. Is probably the biggest impact. You know, I mean, the Thanksgiving festival is the Mayflower. Is the Mayflower remembering in America. But, you know, lots of people will say, you know, the Pilgrim Fathers weren't the Founding Fathers. That's a different American history, you know, and the War of Independence is actually much more important to the history of America than the Mayflower. You know, how the Mayflower is one of those, as with all histories, you know, people inflate it and shrink it, depending.
To their liking.
Their liking,
To what's
their
useful.
benefit.
Well, that's you know, history is an opinion, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you can use it to when it's advantageous, and you can try and hunt it under the carpet when it's not. So so it was important. But what's really important for Southampton to remember, I think, is that it is a place where a place of transmigration. You know, throughout the centuries, people have come.
And still is now.
But the Titanic was a ship where people were migrating to America.
That's right.
You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
the same
that's right.
trajectory. You know, people came from Ireland to Southampton to go to America. There was a camp, Atlantic Park, where Southampton Airport Parkway is now.
Yeah.
From 1922 to 1931, was kind of a refugee camp. These are people who wanted to move to America, and America wouldn't take them. And they got stuck in Southampton. They lived in a camp just outside Southampton for years and years, this transmigration camp. I mean, thousands. I can't remember the exact figures. I'm going to get told off by the historians. But I think it's like in 1905, in 5 months in 1905.
And where were these people coming from?
A lot of them were Eastern European, a lot of them were Jewish. So in 1905, there were 37, in 5 months, the American consulate processed 37,000 Eastern Europeans in Southampton who were moving to America. And half of those were Russian Jews. So this is a really... this story of migration and transmigration is really, really important to Southampton. So for me, it's important the Mayflower is an important ship, but for Southampton, there's lots of ships.
So I was saying, this is what I was thinking. I was saying, you know, why that there are hundreds and thousands of ships that come out of Southampton. Why is the Mayflower so significant?
I think it was used politically. I mean, it was very important. The 1920 anniversary was very important because people were trying to build financial bridges with America after World War I.
Yeah.
And there was a big sense that the Americans had only come to support the British in World War I because of the Pilgrim Fathers connection. You know, there was a huge pageant in Southampton in 1920 to celebrate the 100th anniversary. And the story of that pageant basically is, I think it's John Alden's choice. I think it's John Alden. Should he go on the ship or not? And at that point, someone appears, a genie or something, I don't know who, someone appears and gives John Alden the whole history of what happens, that gives him basically the American history and why it's really important that the Mayflower goes. Right. But this history ends with America joining as an ally in World War I and basically saying, if you don't go, you know, all our boys will suffer in 1917. You know, it's really important.
Okay.
So there was, you know, it's, as I say, it's been used politically, and obviously in 1920 we wanted American money, but the American link to Southampton is also really important. I mean, if you wanted to move to America, you either left from Liverpool or Southampton. So Southampton was competing with Liverpool. It wanted the American ships to come to Southampton. So of course build a great big Mayflower Memorial on the coast, because it just, Liverpool doesn't have that. Liverpool doesn't have the Mayflower, does it? Southampton does. So politically,
Right, I see.
and financially, in the past, people have wanted to re-establish those firm links with America, because it was financially very important to the city, both for trade and for migration. It's no coincidence the Mayflower and the Titanic leave from Southampton. You know, that's
fascinating.
That's
isn't it?
the route. If you're going to go to Americas, that's the route. I mean, it's gateway to the world. It's you know, it's a really important part of, you know, nothing is done without a reason. So that ship is what, you know, for many years what bound the two cities. So it's so, you know, it's been used. So that's what I'm saying. So in 100 years' time, I don't know if it's a useful history. I don't know if it's a useful history now. I don't know if it's a useful.
I think it's really important that, like you said, that people are able to tell their side of the story, that if they haven't had that story expressed, that they can tell that side, and then that inspires other people to be able to express their stories and their culture, because that, you know, like you said, how our age are expressing this belonging. Everybody needs to feel like they belong somewhere, you know, and a culture is a part of that. It's an expression of that, their traditions and their life.
Exactly, and I think a lot of what we're hearing, I mean, I'm a third generation Italian, I don't speak Italian, but that's very common, you know, because actually my father, there was no way he was going to talk Italian. You know, it wasn't fashionable to be Italian when he was young, quite the opposite. You know, he was getting bricks through his window. But, you know, and the Italians then were the enemy in the war. But now it's kind of quite nice to be an Italian. People quite like Italians. You know, so you have that kind of history, but there was absolutely no reason for my father's second generation to hold on to their Italian culture. It just wasn't done in those days. You know, you didn't come here to still be an Italian. You came here to be English. So you stopped speaking the language and you changed. They all, my father and all his brothers and sisters changed their names.
Really?
Yeah, they've all given themselves English names. And I'm the only one of the cousins with an Italian name. And that's because I was born so much later. So I came along in the end of the 60s, and it was okay to be an Italian then. So I've got an Italian name, but my sisters and my cousins don't. Wow. So it's, you know, it's, you know, now we're understanding more. It's important to hold on to your culture. But I think it's quite a common story with different groups of migrants, is actually the first generation doesn't want the second and third generations to know how hard it was, because it is always hard. It's never easy. It's hard, and you're very often excluded, and you're not welcome, and it's a fight, and then you're hungry,
you need to kind of make your own way, and it's kind of build your own life basically from scratch again.
Yeah, so I think a lot of those stories are lost. So you know, that's what we're really we're doing an oral history project as part of this, just trying to really grab those stories.
That's going to be a real challenge for people. Sort of, they have to talk to their grandfathers, and
well, there's lots of belonging. Our Asia project is asking people to talk to their elders. Kelly at Radio Unity 101, he's been running a project with a similar thing. You know, getting people to speak to their grandparents. The oral histories we're making them, but then we're going to work with 60 young people to make films inspired by them, so young people get to know, because young people don't know those stories, and they're important. But I don't think people have generally been told that their stories are important.
No, they aren't.
They aren't.
Yeah. So,
and sometimes you also, it's like, you don't really ask your grandparents, do you? It's like if they're still around, you don't really go and ask, tell me about your life.
So a lot of the small grants that we're funding are for, say, one's about language teaching, one's about dressmaking skills, one's about cultural traditions, bridal traditions.
Yeah.
So that the younger generations get to know their stories.
And obviously they can get involved through their schools. They can get involved online, and they can find out more information that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything's up on our website, so that's your starting point.
Yeah.
Or you can email Mayflower400 at southampton.gov.uk.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
And we'll email you back. But we're really keen to hear from people. Really keen for people to get involved. Follow us on social media.
Yeah, so we've got Facebook and Twitter,
and LinkedIn and Twitter.
LinkedIn, Twitter. Yeah. So you just have to type in the Mayflower 400.
Mayflower 400 Southampton.
And Southampton.
Don't follow Plymouth. Don't follow Plymouth.
So Mayflower Southampton.
Mayflower 400 Southampton.
Mayflower 400
Make sure you're following the right people.
Great. And so how did, just a quick thing before we finish off, I'm really interested to find out how you got involved. And what have you done before? I've been looking at your profile.
Now I'm coughing now. See, making me cough. Sorry.
I've been looking at your profile and it says that you helped to organise some of the Olympics. Is this true?
It is true. And I didn't know. I mean, that sounds much grander than... I was a small cog in a very big wheel of people. There's thousands of us. So essentially when they ran the cultural festival for the 2012 Games...
Yeah.
We worked, there were 12 creative programmers for the nations and regions. So basically each region or nation had a programmer. Yeah. So I was the programmer for the South East.
Wow.
So I covered Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Berkshire, Surrey, Sussex, Kent, Hampshire and the Isle of Wight.
Just a few.
Yes, I had 74. I had 74 local authorities. It used to make me so cross. My colleague in the North East had 8 local authorities, and I had 74. I was always like,
how do you manage that amount of people?
Work. It was a lot. I couldn't do it now. My youth got me through that, I tell you. It was. It was about. Seriously, I'd have about 180, 200 emails a day. And you just,
I take it you had a team behind you.
No, it was me and I had lovely Lucy.
You and Lucy?
Lucy.
Just you and Lucy?
Lucy, who did 2 days a week.
Oh my God.
And she was amazing. She was very effective. She got a lot done in her 2 days.
Did you have to organise the carrying of the torch?
So I didn't. So basically, my job was to make sure that communities, local authorities, and cultural organisations in the South East were involved in the cultural programme and in the torch relays. And we had a thing called Open Weekend where we got people to take part once a year to show off their venues, their buildings, their stories.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So I was a kind of nurturer, inspirer, agitator. Advocate,
trying to get people.
I was mostly on a train. I spent a lot of times on trains. So it was a fantastic job, and I did a big project in Southampton with Turner Sims called Musical Alphabet, which was great. It's really lovely work on the Isle of Wight. We worked with the New Carnival Company. We did a huge carnival parade in 2011 because they hosted the Island Games, so we partnered on that. And a very small project on the Isle of Wight with a group of families who had disabled and autistic children, providing creative opportunities for them. So some very small projects, but also some really big ones like the Paralympic torch ceremony in Buckinghamshire, in Aylesbury. We did that. And,
wow!
So some of them were very big, some of them were very small. It was a lot of fun. I met so many people.
It's really inspiring, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's my. Yes, I'm well used to getting on trains, and I have.
You're very experienced.
I'm very experienced on
This
trains.
is easy. Mayflower 400 is just a piece of cake. This then.
It has different challenges. Obviously, we didn't have COVID.
Exactly. You've got.
Didn't have COVID-19 when I was doing the Olympics, so it was a different.
How are you dealing with that? And
it's hard. I'll be honest. It was hard because I actually got it myself. So I was ill. So I was off work for a very long time. So
oh my gosh.
I kind of came back still a bit ill and desperately trying to catch up. So that was a bit of a shock to my system. And but bless Emmeline, lovely Emmeline who works with me, she kept going.
She powered the ship, so to speak.
She did. She really powered the ship. She's amazing. We're really so lucky to have her. So Emmeline kept going, and I came back in June.
Who's Emmeline? For the people
Emmeline
out there?
is our project coordinator, Emmeline Hickman.
Well done, Evelyn.
Emmeline. Well, no, big well done, Emmeline. So Emmeline kept going. I came back in June.
Wow.
And at that same time, we appointed Joe Ross and Louise Birchall. So Louise is our production manager and Joe's our outreach officer.
Okay.
So suddenly we became a team. So it was great. So literally before that, it was just me and Emmeline. And I'm only part-time. So, so really, Emmeline is the glue. I always say she's the glue which holds it all together. And then, of course, we had to change everything because our project...
New rules. New
we had
things,
launched in March, but we were supposed to start again in June.
Because I remember when I spoke to you at the beginning, you had so many different events, and they were going to be outdoors, and they were going to have lots of people coming in and learning different crafts.
Yeah. Well, lots of it
changed like virtual now.
Yeah. Lots of it's gone virtually, but not all of it. I mean, the exhibition's open.
Oh, yeah,
Last week we ran Empathy Museum for 10 days in West Quay, a mile in my shoes, and luckily that was a project which was very easy to do in a way that was self-isolating. You could take part but not be in a group.
Yeah.
The Towers of Light project, we found a way to deliver that. So instead of us going into people's houses, we're making it so they can stick it in their own windows.
Yeah. That's so.
And you can watch it from, you see it from the beach. So actually, it's perfectly manageable. But we'll probably do times. What we'll have to do is things like time slots and test and trace.
Yeah.
Track and trace is the Royal Mail.
Yeah, exactly.
So get a little plug. Test and trace. So obviously we're having to put in measures to make sure people are safe.
Yeah.
But because a lot of our work was outdoor anyway, that's already made it quite a bit safer.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work has. So Port Art Asia, they had to completely change their project. They were delivering a big dance piece for the Mela, but of course the Mela got cancelled. So Art Asia have had to come up with a completely new project, and they've done amazingly well.
We
with
also
that.
have a new project plan for our Chinese New Year as well. This kind of all has to change like virtually. So
but it's it's some of it's happening, some of it's changed, but a lot of it will be legacy as well. I mean, one thing I do like about the films that we've made is they'll always be there
as well.
Yeah.
And you can make it
it's really lovely actually.
Resource
exactly.
for later.
And a lot of the resources we're about to make some films which again are about hidden histories of stories people don't know about Southampton. So working with the Park Centre at Southampton University.
Okay.
So there'll be a film.
Is there any hidden story that was like really shocking that you were just like, oh my god, that's amazing?
There were actually, because
some secret story that people want to know.
I don't know the whole story yet, but Professor Tony Kushner, who we're working with, tells me there was a very large Chinese crew on the Titanic. So we're going to look at that.
There was a large
Chinese crew on the Titanic.
Wow.
I know.
What were they doing on there?
I don't know, because there's, according to Sea City Museum, there's a photo of every person that was on the ship, and none of those are Chinese. So I don't quite know. But so I will find out in a week or two when we make this film. So that was a surprise. There's a group of Muslim seafarers buried in Southampton Cemetery. So one of the films will be about them. And apparently they had a huge funeral procession. One of the queens in India sent one of her servants over to Southampton to lobby for her. So he made a big speech at Oxford Street Hotel. So we've got that. Wow. We've got the Atlantic Park story, the transmigrant camp. That's that's a really interesting story.
I'd love to hear that.
Millets, Millets, the store.
Yeah.
So that was a Jewish family who migrated to Southampton. So that big store that we all know is a Southampton migration story for a Jewish family. So there's going to be quite a lot of stories that come out about Southampton. Yeah,
I can't wait to hear these stories. I'm really looking forward to it.
Good.
I'm so happy that you came here today.
No, so am I. Thank you for asking.
You came and let everyone know about what's going on, because I think it is really important, and it's really important that all the communities come together and engage and participate.
And it's really important. It doesn't work without you. So do come.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of Southampton community that sometimes they don't realise what's happening. There's so much happening in the city. There's so much culture here, and you can and it's right on your doorstep.
Yeah, and it's free.
And it's free. It's free.
Yeah, no excuses.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for
today.
asking me. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you've enjoyed our talks today, and we just like to say thank you so much for coming down and sharing your stories and this amazing project with us. And I'm sure that so many people.
More about it.
Yeah, we're going to hear more about it in the months to come.
Yeah.
So
great.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, guys, for watching, and I hope you feel inspired. And we will see you again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.